This is Mark in the Dark, shedding light on a forgotten part of history. Today, the Freikorps. Before the swastika, before the Nazi Party, something else took shape in Germany. Out of the Treaty of Versailles emerged the Freikorps, an armed group of often unemployed soldiers used by the government as buffers, proxies, and enforcers when the interest of German business and the German government was at stake. That is how violence is legitimized and used by the German state to eliminate threats against the existing German establishment. To understand why, we have to begin at the end of the First World War and be honest about how that ending actually looked. Germany in late 1918 was not a single experience. Yes, part of the country was occupied. Allied troops had entered the Rhineland. The British blockade continued. Starvation and hunger throughout Germany was rampant. For millions of German soldiers, the end of the war was a completely different experience. They marched home, not from a shattered front, not from a conquered capital, but from positions that still felt held and intact. There was no Allied army following them into Berlin, no decisive battlefield collapse. If the German army dissolved, it dissolved politically, not militarily. And this created a very dangerous illusion. And the illusion was that Germany was not truly defeated. The greater part of that illusion was created and promoted by senior German officers of the high command like Erich Ludendorff. This myth claimed that army had been stabbed in the back, betrayed by civilians, politicians, socialists, and of course, as always, the Jews. Germany lost not at the front, but at home. This myth was already circulating before the Treaty of Versailles was signed. And that matters because Versailles didn't invent grievances, it organized it. When the war ended in the West, it did not end in the East. Because of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, German forces were still occupying the Baltic, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and parts of the Ukraine. At Versailles, the Allies faced a problem they didn't want to solve themselves. Russia was in a civil war. Bolshevik forces were pushing west. The new Baltic states were fragile. Poland and Ukraine were fighting over borders that barely existed. And the Allies didn't want to send any more soldiers to fight the Bolsheviks. So a decision was made. German forces were quietly allowed, even encouraged, to remain temporarily as a buffer. Defeated Germany was asked to keep doing Europe's dirty work. Those soldiers were no longer the imperial army. They weren't civilians. They weren't fully illegal. They were rebranded as volunteers. That's the true birth of the Freikorps. An army without a state, a mission without accountability, violence with state permission. In Latvia, formations like the Iron Division and the Baltic Landswehr fought Bolsheviks and civilians. Executions, terror, and ethnic violence became routine. And all of it happened in a space where responsibility was deliberately blurred. Berlin could deny control, the Allies could deny involvement, and the men learned a lesson that would not unlearn itself. Violence was legitimate, violence was useful, violence was rewarded. Back in Germany, the Weimar Republic was terrified of collapse, terrified of revolution, terrified it wouldn't survive. So it made its own bargain. Through emergency budgets, army political funds, and interior ministries, the state paid these men. The Reichswehr supplied weapons and logistics. Figures like Hans von Seck ensured the system remained deniable. The logic was simple. Use the angry soldiers to restore order. And at first it worked. The Freikorps crushed uprising in Berlin and the Ruhr. They murdered political opponents like Rosa Luxemburg. They were almost never punished. That's the turning point. The state had outsourced violence and taught a generation that law was optional if the cause felt urgent enough. This did not begin with Nazism. Nazism absorbed the Freikorps, their methods, their men, and the belief that violence could remake the nation. The SA did not invent paramilitary politics. It inherited a culture already trained by proxy war, deniability, and fear. This is not a comparison, it's a warning. When wars end without reckoning, when soldiers return undefeated in their own minds, when grievances is given admissions instead of accountability, And when states borrow violence to save themselves, history enters a red zone. Not immediately, not dramatically, but reliably. That is how it began, before the swastika. This has been Mark in the Dark, shedding a little more light on forgotten parts of history.